Alright, welcome back. So, in this video, we're now going to talk about the next primal emotion or primal frequency, which this one should be pretty obvious, right? So, the next one is going to be, now, assume I can say this on YouTube, but the next one's going to be the sexual emotion, right? Or the sexual frequency, right? So, like I said, this one is probably going to be pretty obvious, but just to go over the first point, so, basically in a nutshell, to ensure the survival of the species, the body can't just leave it to chance that the negative mind will choose to try to reproduce. To increase this possibility, the body charges the sexual frequency. So in other words, reproducing, right, the propagation of the species, that's another thing that the body feels is way too important to just leave to the negative mind to choose to do it, right? So it can't just leave it to that. Pandas, for example, I think this urge is suppressed for whatever reason, right? I don't know if that's true, but I believe I read that somewhere, or I've seen that at some point in the past. Like certain pandas, for whatever reason, they just don't have the urge to reproduce, and so it's actually causing a problem for their species, right? So this is very important. Normally, a species will induce this urge to make sure the species survives. So what the body does, just to go through it, it will send a command to your subconscious. Now your subconscious will switch to what we would just call your sexual frequency. And on that frequency, you feel the sexual emotion, right? It results in highly vivid imagination, right? As with any transcendental, or as with any subconscious thought expression. Again, from the body, I don't consider it to be transcendental, right? Transcendental is when the subconscious is charged from the mind. When it's charged from the body, in this case, we'll just call it a primal frequency or emotion. But the subconscious thought still expresses itself the same way, which is through your emotion and through your imagination, or it alters your perception. So even in terms of altering your perception in terms of vivid imagination, it alters your perception in terms of what you're looking at, right? And I talked a little bit about before, like certain things will stand out to you. We'll talk about that, though, in this second point. But it alters what's logical to you, right? So that frequency will alter what makes sense to you, and what makes sense to you on that frequency is to try to have sex, right? That's basically what it's supposed to do. So it becomes extremely rational for you to try to do that, which is why the urge is so powerful and strong to do it. And you can also get creativity out of it, but again, that isn't really that important when it comes to primal frequencies. So for that second part, right, so in terms of how it alters your perception, in terms of what you focus on, the sexual primal emotion is unique. So it's very different from other primal emotions in the sense that the subject is important. So we haven't talked too much about subjects yet, because that's really more important later when you're trying to control the subconscious. But just to go through this point, the sexual primal emotion is unique in that the subject is important. This is necessary for the body to distinguish between a man and a woman. So, in other words, when I was talking about anxiety, right, notice it didn't really matter that much what the subject was, the point of focus, right, of the intention that induces the anxiety frequency. So I can focus on a bear running at me, and then the bear is the subject, I focus on the subject, my intention expresses the command or assertion that this bear is a threat to me, and that causes my subconscious to switch to the anxiety frequency. It doesn't matter. It could have been a bear, it could have been a tiger, it could have been a wolf, it could have been water, right? If I have like a fear of water, some people have that, right? It could be the sky, it could be public speaking, it could be homework, it could be anything, right? Anything, it doesn't matter what the subject is, the body will still respond with anxiety. In your other primal emotions are like that too, but the sexual primal emotion is different. That one's very unique because the body will read your subconscious frequency all the way down to the subject. So more specifically, it reads your subconscious activity all the way down to the actual subject that your intention was focused on. So that's actually very important. That's very unique. I don't think your body ever does that with anything else. It might potentially do it with food or something, but in terms of the primal emotions I discussed, it doesn't do that at all. Now, the reason it does that, right, the reason it reads your subconscious in such a fine-toothed way is that for this last part, it needs to distinguish between a man and a woman, because the purpose of the subconscious, the purpose of the body commanding your subconscious to charge at that frequency is to reproduce, right? You can't reproduce with the same sex, right? So the body needs to make sure it's charging that frequency in response to the correct sex. So there are subtle little differences in how your intention, we didn't really talk about it yet, because you might say, well, how does the body know what the subject is? Does it get that information just from the frequency? And the thing is it can, if it reads it much more like closely, right? In the way where that comes from is has to do with the connection between your intention and the subconscious, which we haven't talked too much about that yet. We talked more about that in chapter 7. So, but yeah, if it reads the subconscious, like finely enough, it can get information about the subject you are focused on too. It's just not usually necessary to do that. That's kind of a waste of the body's time, majority of the time. But it isn't for sexual emotions. So the body needs to know if the body's charging this frequency for the purpose of reproduction, then it needs to know what sex you're looking at, right? It also needs to be a human, but it needs to know what sex you're focused on. So if you're a man, the body has to charge a sexual frequency a little different from how it would charge on a woman. And if you're a woman, it has to charge a little different from how it would charge on a man in order for this process to work properly. So for men, right, we'll talk a little more about the homosexuality case in this part, but if you're a man and you're heterosexual, right, your body will recognize when you're focusing on a particular body type, right? So when that body type would naturally be a woman, but a woman has particular features, right? So it knows when you're focusing on the body type that is generally a woman, and when you do that and you produce a specific kind of attention, now the body doesn't really wait for the mind to try to focus on the sexual frequency that much. As soon as the body knows what's going on, by you looking at a woman, it'll try to start inducing it already, right? And so the mind goes along with it a little bit, then it comes in more. But when you focus on a particular body type, it recognizes that, switches to the sexual frequency, and then it starts compelling you to focus on sex, right? That's so when you see an attractive woman or attractive female, right, you might see her not really be thinking about sex, and now you can't help but think about sex. That's because the body's trying to induce this, so you feel the urge to have sex with this woman and reproduce. Same thing for women. Now we go into this one here. So this one there's something I want to say about this. So just to go over, the sexually ideal body type is determined by the body. However, the mind can also charge the sexual emotion, choose the subject more freely. So basically what I'm saying there is, just to go, before I even get into it, just to say, the body, it's just like anxiety anxiety and fear are almost the same frequency. There is a kind of similar dynamic with the sexual emotion. So there's a sexual emotion that the body charges, and there's a sexual emotion the mind charges. It's not really that important to make a distinction between those either. Just like fear and anxiety, they're virtually the same. But there is a slight difference between the sexual emotion charged by the mind and the one charged by the body. Now, the body has evolved to charge, right, to charge in response to a particular body type. That's its preference, because that's what natural selection and evolution, in the nutshell, has determined is the most ideal body type or the most ideal parameters to focus on as far as knowing whether or not a potential mate is good for breeding. Basically, is healthy and able to breed, right? So the body determines, when you look at a particular girl, right, there will be certain features that you look at. There's a certain ideal sort of set of parameters that your body has. And the more a girl matches those ideal parameters, the more likely your body and the more powerfully your body is going to induce the sexual frequency. So it kind of occurs on a graduated scale. The more the more a woman's body matches these ideal features that's built into your DNA, right, that you just evolved to have them, but the more she matches those ideal features, then the more intensely the body will charge the sexual frequency when you focus on her. The less she matches those parameters, the less intensely. It can still come in, but it's not going to be as intense. So, so this is something. There was you've probably seen it. So I've seen these like videos talking about. I don't really do. Again, I don't do social media. I haven't even done it yet as a recording of this video, but eventually I'm gonna do. Oh my God, I'm gonna sign up for social media accounts to, just to kind of tell people about my website and these videos. I'm not into social media at all. I don't care about that. Never have. But I have heard of videos on social media and I guess posts where they talk about like fat acceptance, and they try to say how like they try to promote this idea that I don't know, like I don't really know what they're trying to say. I don't know if they're trying to say that you could be very fat but still be very healthy, or they're trying to promote this idea that a person, usually it's girls, but a girl could be very, I don't like really use that word fat very much, but they could be overweight or obese, but they're still attractive and you still should date them and accept them for who they are. The problem with that idea, right, is you have to understand that it's not the person's mind that's technically choosing. There is an exception to that, which we'll talk about for the second part. But generally, it's not the person's mind that's choosing what's attractive. That comes from the body. And the body evolved to have that. There's a reason the body has evolved to not be attracted to women who are very obese. Because when the more obese you are, the more you deviate from the ideal body type that the body has determined is best, right? There's not really anything a person can do about that. They are not the one who has chosen to not be attracted to obese women, right? Any more than they're the one who've chosen to be attracted to the sex they like, right? It's just like when I was a kid, I remember the first time I saw a naked woman was in this stash of Playboys that I found in my attic, which I guess was my dad's. Right, I was like 7 years old, and I didn't know anything about any of that, right? Because there was no internet. I'm that old, right? So there was no internet back then or any of that. That was the first time I didn't even know what I was really looking at. But I still remember getting sexually excited. It was a new feeling for me, right? Now, where did that come from? It's not like anyone told me, oh, you have to. Well, I did know to be attracted to women. I knew that was the general idea, but no one told me that what to do to get sexually excited looking at women. It just happened. I didn't even know it was happening. I wasn't trying to make myself excited. That's because that response is built into my body, and it's predetermined by my DNA, right? What the body has determined is the ideal type is what we call attractive or sexually attractive, right? Or sexy, in other words, right? That's the word we use for it, but to the body, that's just the ideal type. So if a girl has certain curves, certain, let's just say certain features, right, in her body, evolution-wise, the body has determined that's ideal. So if a woman is too old or too young or looks sick or is overweight or too skinny or whatever, the body determines that these are not ideal, right, for reproduction. And so you don't feel much sexual attraction from those outliers, right? And so it's the body that has determined what's sexy, and it has determined that for a reason, right? Because that is ideal. I imagine if you took the data on it, you would generally see that the best outcomes for birth are from sexually attractive women. And I'm not talking about in terms of joy and having sex with them. I'm talking about in terms of, issues with birth, right? They would generally be the ones who have the highest success rate. That's not an accident, right? That's why the body has picked them for you to be sexually attracted to. So when in this fat acceptance movement, when they say that you should just like them anyway, just know that the body disagrees with you, right? And that's not, you can't blame the person for that. That's evolution. However, what I will say is that that's referring to sexual frequency charged by the body. Now, the mind can also charge a sexual frequency too. And the mind is way more free to do whatever it wants with the subject. So this is actually where fetishes come from. Fetishes don't come from the body, they come from the mind. So the mind can charge the sexual frequencies in such a way where it could be attracted to someone obese or someone very old, or it could be attracted to certain features on a woman or whatever, right? So that basically is where that comes from. So the mind is free to do it. Now, how the mind does it is, it could be important for spiritual effects, right? There are certainly negative sexual frequencies, and then there are more positive ones. Well, but we haven't really talked about anything about spirituality yet. That's in the second book. But yeah, when the mind charges sexual energy or sexual emotions, that can be problematic spiritually. Now, yeah. So just to get to this last part, sometimes this process contains errors because it involves the body. The body is always going to have mistakes. And the body commands the subconscious to be attracted to the same sex instead of the opposite sex, which results in homosexuality. So that's my theory on where homosexuality comes from, right? If the body can contain an error, right, where it's commanding the subconscious to be attracted to the ideal body type for the same sex. It's not supposed to do that. That doesn't result in reproduction. That's a mistake, right? But the body has lots of mistakes. Some of them are highly consequential, some of them aren't, right? So this is one of the highly consequential ones, right? So when that happens, usually this is why a lot of people when they're homosexual, they know pretty much from the time they're a kid. Just like someone who's heterosexual knows from the time that they're a kid that they like chicks, or they like the sex they're attracted to. If you're a heterosexual female, you like guys, right? But if you're homosexual, you generally know, you've always known, right? That's because it's written into your DNA to be attracted to the same sex, which again is an error. I know some religious people say, no, that's not true. It's always a choice. I don't think that's the case, right? That's not consistent with my observations. I could ask God about that. Never really felt the need to. But again, we'll get more into spiritual stuff later in the second half of this, in the second book. But yeah, one thing I will say, though, is that the mind can still charge sexual energy to be attracted to the same sex if it wants to anyway. I imagine that rarely happens. There's no reason to do that. I think girls probably do that way more than guys do it. But most people just stick to the charge that their body charges, right? They go along, they sort of piggyback off that charge when charging with the mind. And that's going to result in them being attracted to the sex that their body's attracted to. Right, so yeah, that's pretty much it for the sexual frequency. But this is how the sexual emotions work. This is the dynamic from the negative and positive minds. In the next chapter, we're going to talk about probably a primal emotion that's a little less obvious than this one. And that one I feel is important to talk about because I think a lot of people don't know about it. I'm used to it. I've known it for years, but I feel like a lot of people don't really know about that one. So yeah, we'll talk about that next video. But yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.